So good morning or good afternoon. Happy Veterans Day or Remembrance Day. I'm Julie Broadway, president at the American Horse Council and the American Horse Council Foundation, and we're delighted to host this webinar this afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Washington, D.C. We had a little rain after 38 days of a drought, and we've got some sunshine today and warm temperatures, so starting to feel a little more like fall here. And as I mentioned in our press release, as I think about fall and the pending holidays and things that are coming up, it's a prime time for somebody to buy their Christmas pony or to sell a horse, or maybe it's a good time to trade before the new competition season begins. So lots of good reasons to talk about equine appraisals and the importance of them and the value of them and why people should really consider that as they transition from one horse to another, or whatever the circumstances might be. Just a reminder to our audience, if you would, please put yourself on mute so we don't have a lot of background noise. And we are recording this, and so you're welcome to listen to the replay afterwards, or to return to it as often as need be. And we will share our guest speakers' contact information with you at the end of the video, so you'll have a way to get in touch with her if you have some more questions. So I can honestly say at the American Horse Council, we get all types of calls from people in the industry who are thinking of transitioning their horse to a second career or to something different, to change their own discipline or whatever they'd like to do. And we often tell them that getting an independent appraisal is really, really useful in helping them to think about what the horse is valued at, if they'd like to donate it, or if they're thinking of selling it, what might be a fair market price to ask, all those important things. But our guest today is Tracy Dopko. She is with Daventry Appraisal Services. She's considered one of the world's leading equine appraisers and an expert witness. She is a senior equine appraiser with the American Society of Equine Appraisers. She's a certified member with the International Society of Appraisers, an accredited senior member with the American Society of International Appraisers, I believe I've got that right, and also a private investigator who specializes in equine cases. She has been appraising horses for over 20 years, along with being hired globally as an equine expert witness and a consultant in a lot of different types of litigation cases. I can just imagine, Tracy, that there's some really interesting stories to tell about clients you've worked with over the years, because I can say at the American Horse Council, we get some real doozies of some calls sometimes about things that are going on that I would have never seen someone getting themselves into. She has appraised everything from a family trail horse up to Olympic horses. So she's got a lot of breadth and depth in her experience here. She's also a member of the Personal Property Resource Panel for the Appraisal Foundation, which is an organization that sets the U.S. constitutionally authorized standards and qualifications for appraisers. So Tracy, we are so delighted to have you with us. Help our listeners get a better understanding of why an appraisal might be a really smart move.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Julie. And I just wanted to thank American Horse Council for reaching out to me to do this presentation today. And thanks to everyone for taking the time on Veterans Day to join us. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So thanks, Julie, for the introduction. So today I just wanted to talk to you about the value and the importance of equine appraisals. I'm going to talk to you about whether you should be getting an appraisal for if you want to sell your horse, an appraisal for insurance, when you donate your horse, what needs to be done as far as appraisals go. So I'm just going to jump in and get started. So personal property is defined in the what's called Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. We often refer to it as USPAP. as identifiable, tangible objects that are considered by the general public as being personal. So, for example, furniture, artwork, antiques, gems and jewelries, collectibles, machinery and equipment. So, all tangible property that is not classified as real estate. So, basically, anything that's not nailed down. Things like buildings, houses, farms, farmland would all be classified as real estate. So horses fall under personal property appraisals, but unlike the real estate appraisal industry, which is regulated, appraising personal property is an unregulated profession that leaves the consumer with the burden of determining whether the appraiser they engage um, is qualified. So a qualified appraiser is knowledgeable about the item being appraised and trained in things like appraisal theory, the principles of valuation, ethics, and should be up to date on their USPAP courses. So, what is an appraisal? So, at its core, an appraisal is an opinion of value. So, an appraisal can also be defined as the act or process of developing a thoroughly researched and well supported opinion of value by an impartial and properly qualified individual. So one of the things we end up doing with horses as an appraiser is determining what their fair market value is. So fair market value, the definition is the price at which property would change hands between a willing buyer and a willing seller, neither being under any compulsion to buy or to sell, and both having reasonable knowledge of relevant facts. And what that basically means is if you decide to put up your horse for sale tomorrow, what would the average person be willing to pay, knowing what its veterinary history is, training history, showing history, just all of those things. So there's three approaches that an appraiser uses in order to value property. So the first is called a sales comparison approach, and this is used most often for horses, and it utilizes recent sales of similar horses, and is accomplished by researching all relevant and available sales records of comparable horses. The second approach is called an income approach, and this approach to value is rarely used for horses, but may be useful in certain cases, such as a thoroughbred breeding stallion that covers hundreds of mares a year. And the last approach is called the cost approach. And this approach is usually not applicable to equines, but can be used for equine related items such as a horse trailer or saddle. So, for example, the cost approach includes things like reproducing an item, building an item from scratch, or replacing an item. So, insurance companies normally only insure horses for agreed value or actual cash value. Actual cash value is often referred to as fair market value. And so, because of that, excuse me, horses normally aren't insured for replacement value. And so, we don't usually appraise them for replacement value. So, we use that sales comparison approach. But for example, if you have a horse trailer that's been partially damaged and you need to go through insurance and make a claim, they may end up doing what's called a reproduction or replacement approach, replacement value to sort of figure out what the insurance company is going to have to pay out on that horse trailer. So within an appraisal report, we include something called the scope of work. And so the scope of work is the type and extent of research and analyses required to prepare the appraisal and is determined by the appraiser. So in each appraisal, an appraiser must identify the problem to be solved, determine and perform the scope of work necessary to develop credible assignment results, and they need to disclose the scope of work in the report. So basically, the appraiser needs to show their work in the appraisal report and explain how they arrived at the value for a particular horse. So, essential elements of a credible appraisal: it needs to clearly identify the items being appraised, the scope of work performed by the appraiser, the client and other intended users, and the intended use of the report. And so the intended use, for example, the appraiser may be asked to complete the appraisal for divorce settlement purposes, for insurance, or maybe the person is donating the horse to a charitable organization like a university or a college. The appraisal report must also include the definition of value. So we already talked about the fair market value, the approach to value, the effective date, and the subject item's relevant characteristics. And the effective date is when I need to appraise the horse as of. So, for example, if someone's going through a divorce, often the effective date is the date of separation, or some courts require a current date. If your horse is unfortunately passed away due to colic and you're doing an insurance claim, the effective date would be the date the horse died or passed away. So that's the day I'm going to be valuing the horse as of. Um, and so the data and analysis required to support the opinion and value must be effectively communicated within that appraisal report. So there's no single standard appraisal report format, or style. So regardless of the type of appraisal report used, all reports must contain sufficient information to enable the intended user to properly understand the conclusions and to be credible. So, in order to be USPAP compliant, a one-page letter stating a horse's value is not going to be acceptable. That's not going to be enough room on the page to explain to someone how you arrived at the value of that animal. So, as I mentioned earlier, appraising horses and being a personal property appraiser is a self-regulated profession. So, there tends to be three types of equine appraisers. The first is appraisers with no appraisal designations. And the second is accredited appraisers. And the third is senior appraisers. So I'm just going to really quickly sort of dive into what those three areas mean. So, appraisers with no appraisal designation, this category includes appraisers who either don't hold a current license or membership with an appraisal organization and have never taken any appraisal courses, or it could be appraisers who've lost their certification or appraisal license due to unethical or poor appraisal practices. They may have failed to meet the continuing education requirements of their appraiser licensing organization, or they've failed to pay their yearly dues. So the next category is what we call accredited appraisers. So this category includes entry-level appraisers. It should be noted that there's no mandatory continuing education or courses required for accredited equine appraisers. All courses in continuing education are done strictly on a volunteer basis. And while they may hold a current appraisal membership, it doesn't necessarily mean they've completed all of the courses and programs set out by the appraiser organization. And the last group of appraisers is what we consider to be senior appraisers. So this category includes accredited appraisers who've also completed an appraiser society's appraisal courses, which is normally a minimum of 105 hours of work, have met the appraiser qualifications board. We often refer to it as the AQB, personal property appraisal minimum qualifications criteria. And this is usually minimum 700 hours of appraisal experience, completed a 15-hour USPAP course, and is an equine appraiser member in good standing with their appraiser organization. The senior appraisers should meet the AQB's continuing education requirements every 5 years to maintain their senior appraiser status, but again, it's not mandatory within some of the equine appraiser organizations. So some organizations do not police or keep track of when their senior appraiser members are due for upgrading or renewal. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you are in need of an appraiser and you're sort of, sort of vetting who you're going to use. So consumers can go one step further to ensure they're hiring a competent appraiser. So some equine appraisers belong to appraiser organizations in the United States and around the world that are considered partners of the Appraisal Foundation. So along with the Code of Ethics, these organizations adhere to the education and experience criteria established by the AQB of the Appraisal Foundation. So, for example, I'm a member of the International Society of Appraisers. So, in order to earn my appraisal designation with this society, I was required to complete an intensive course in appraisal studies, pass 2 proctored exams, and submit 4 different appraisal reports that were reviewed by an appraisal review panel. And I'm also subject to mandatory requalification process, which includes completing a requalification course, submission of an appraisal report for review, and a minimum of 100 hours of professional development credits every 5 years. So when hiring an appraiser, it's important to ask what kind of continuing education and courses an appraiser has taken, and ask when their last USPAP course was completed, Sometimes I end up reaching out to a few different equine appraisers to help me on different complex cases that I'm working on. And I always make sure to ask if, when the last time they've completed USPAP. And in some instances, I've had some appraisers say they've never completed a USPAP course, and some that may say that they haven't done one since, 2014. So it's important to ask the appraiser when they've completed those courses. So also due to markets constantly changing, it's also important that appraiser keeps themselves current. So professional appraisers should be trained to deflect any attempt to influence the appraisal or opinion of value, and they need to remain independent, impartial, and objective. So since the appraiser has the sole responsibility for the analyses, opinions, and conclusions contained in the appraisal, his or her independence is a critical element to enhance the public trust that appraisals contain credible opinions of value. So appraisers complying with USPAP are required to maintain this level of independence and to perform assignments without bias. So it's so incredibly important for an appraiser to maintain their independence. So for those that are interested in donating their horse to a university or college within the United States, this is a great way to sort of give back to the equine community and allow those up and coming riders to have those great horses to use in their program. So not only are you able to get a tax write-off, the school, has just a great benefit of gaining those horses into their program. But one thing a lot of people are not aware of is that there are new regulations for IRS charitable donations, and these came into place in 2019. So the IRS now requires that appraisals need to be qualified appraisals and be completed by qualified appraisers. But what exactly does that mean? So we're going to actually dive into this just really quickly. So I find many horse owners and even some equine appraisers are not aware of these new regulations. So in the chat box, I'm going to get Julie to include a link to an article that I wrote for the Chronicle of the Horse this spring on equine donation appraisals and what a qualified appraisal and a qualified appraiser are. And I've also included some information in that article from a colleague who worked as an appraiser at the IRS regarding reviews and audits and what can trigger them. So, over the years, the IRS has run into issues with appraisal reports that are only 1 or 2 pages. They may not include appraisal methodology, no justification for the value, or the IRS has determined they were completed by someone who doesn't perform appraisals regularly. So these reports are more likely to be audited than properly written appraisal reports completed by a credentialed and experienced appraiser. So a qualified appraiser is an individual who's earned an appraisal designation from a recognized professional appraiser organization. So this designation is awarded on the basis of demonstrating competence in valuing the type of property for which the appraisal is performed, or the appraiser may have successfully completed professional or college level coursework in valuing the type of property and has 2 or more years experience in valuing the type of property being appraised. So what is a qualified appraiser as defined by the IRS? So the individual regularly prepares appraisals for which he or she is paid. In the appraiser report, the appraiser must state their appraisal education and experience in appraising the type of property being valued. Sorry. And although not required by law, an appraiser should be up to date on their USPAP courses and are required by most organizations to successfully complete a USPAP course every 2 years. So the next thing we're going to look at really quickly is what is considered a qualified appraisal to the IRS. So it must contain a detailed description of the property, the valuation effective date. So that's the date we already talked about earlier of the day that the animal is going to be valued on, the fair market value as of that effective date, the terms of any agreement by the donor and donee that relates to the use, restriction, sale, or other disposition of the donated property. So it's a bit of a convoluted requirement by the IRS, but basically what that means is if I decide tomorrow to donate my semi-retired, show jumper to a university in the United States. And my one stipulation for the university is I'm happy to have the students, ride that horse at the facility, but I do not want the horse shown. So that's going to be a restriction on the donation of that property. And that can actually end up changing the value of the property if that horse isn't going to be allowed to show anymore. So other things that need to be included in the report is the date of contribution to the donee. So what day are you donating that horse? Name, address, and taxpayer identification number of the appraiser, qualifications of the appraiser and their credentials, the signature of the appraiser and the date signed by the appraiser, and IRS charitable donation declaration by the appraiser. So it's kind of a paragraph that the IRS requires us to insert within the appraiser report, making sure that we understand that that we're not being biased and we're not sort of advocating for that donor. Excuse me. So there also needs to be a statement that the appraisal was prepared for income tax purposes, the method of valuation used to determine the fair market value, such as the sales comparison approach, the specific basis for the valuation, such as comparable sales transactions. And then lastly, you need to make sure that a qualified appraisal needs to be signed by the appraiser no earlier than 60 days before the date of the contribution. So, for example, if you have spoken with the university and you've decided to donate the horse, and the university says, hey, we're happy to take your horse, but can we wait until March 1st? In the meantime, can you get an appraisal done on the horse? Which is required when you're going to do a charitable donation. So it's important that your appraiser knows that because the report cannot be completed more than 60 days out of that donation date.
So Tracy, this is one of the most common questions we receive at the American Horse Council is, perhaps a loved one has passed and I've inherited a horse, or I'm going through a tough financial time in my life. I would like to donate a horse, or maybe it's a divorce or whatever the circumstances are. And people have not done an appraisal, but they have in fact already donated or committed to donate this horse. So now, following that little 60-day rule you said, so now do they go back at that point and have to have an appraisal done because they're going to fill out their tax returns and think they're going to write a number down?
Yeah, so the only stipulation with the IRS is you just can't get an appraisal done 60 days before you've donated those items, but the appraiser report can be done anytime after you've donated the items. So I've actually had people come to me a year later
Mhm.
and say, whoops, we didn't realize we needed to get an appraisal done. So the IRS is okay with that. Obviously, there's going to be other issues there because they've likely missed that deadline, and the taxpayer is going to have to ask for an extension from the IRS. But after the horse has been donated, absolutely, it doesn't matter when the appraisal is done. There usually just is that tax deadline. So it just has to be, can't be any further before that 60-day before donation, if that makes sense.
Now, as an expert witness, do you also get called upon, I'm going to say by the IRS or someone who has maybe submitted something that they think is legitimate, and the IRS person is saying, we're not certain that we feel this is an appropriate value for this particular.
Absolutely. I do this a lot. And I'm actually going to get into this just in a couple of slides here, but
Okay.
it does happen quite frequently, which is why the IRS has put in these new stipulations because too many people donating property, everything from artwork to stamps, coins, boats, you name it. We're hiring unqualified appraisers with just no qualifications, and they were submitting, say, 1 or 2 page letters as proof of value. And I mean, it's just not good enough. It's not good enough in the court of law. It's really just not good enough in the industry, period. And so that's why the IRS came up with these new stipulations so that this was being done properly and to cut down on the number of people that were overinflating items and then donating them.
Well, that's why I thought I'd ask that question there, because I see their next slide is consequences for overstating. And I can venture to say that there are a lot of people who are probably very lenient or generous with what they believe the value of their horse is, and that might come into question. So take it from there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely consequences by the IRS for overflating or overstating values. So falsely or fraudulently overstating the value of property is considered tax fraud. So an appraisal report that's completed with the intention of grossly inflating the value of a horse is a red flag to the IRS and normally results in an audit. So if the IRS determines an appraiser's valuation is grossly under or overvalued, the owner of the property may be subject to a penalty of up to 40% of the stated value. As well, the appraiser may be forced to pay a penalty of 125% of the gross income received from the completion of the appraiser report and subject to also a civil penalty. And they also take the chance that the IRS will no longer accept appraisals from that appraiser in the future. So it's important to understand that the IRS has its own in-house appraisers who are properly licensed and trained in appraisal methodology and procedures. So if there is a discrepancy in value between the taxpayer's appraiser and the IRS's appraiser, the IRS has the right to decide the correct valuation, and you can imagine which one they go with. So some horse owners are under the impression that they can donate the original purchase price of the horse to the not-for-profit organization. So, for example, you may have a horse that was purchased at 9 years of age and was successfully competing at Grand Prix dressage, and now the horse is 18 years old, semi-retired, recently downgraded to second level, or could be even sidelined with a minor suspensory ligament injury. And regardless of what the horse was originally purchased for, an appraiser can only put a fair market value on the horse. And so I find a lot of horse owners will come to me saying, well, I originally paid $150,000 for the horse 10 years ago. That's what I want to donate it for. But unfortunately, what, you know, that's not how it works. So it's going to be, again, that fair market value. If you're donating the horse tomorrow, what would that horse be worth tomorrow on the open market as is? So another situation that frequently occurs is the horse owner who's been trying to sell their horse for, say, the last year and has finally given up and decided to donate the horse instead, but assumes the value will be the selling price or the sales price that they've been asking for the horse over the last year. But unfortunately, sometimes there's a reason why these horses haven't sold yet, and it may be a result of poor radiographs. It could be that the horse has been overpriced. Maybe it's a difficult ride, and there just aren't the proper buyers out there that are going to be attracted to that type of horse. So again, the value must be the current fair market value of the horse. One thing that I get a lot of people contact me. So I often get weekly calls from horse owners looking to purchase equine insurance for their horses, and they're often under the impression that they need to pay for an appraisal first. So do you actually need an appraisal for insurance? And so the answer is it kind of depends. So the first thing that you want to do is have a conversation with your insurance broker. An appraisal is normally not needed if you could submit a recent bill of sale or a letter from a trainer. Sometimes, if you're insuring a foal, insurance companies will agree to insure the foal for twice the amount of the stud fee, sometimes 3 times the amount of the stud fee. And in the case of a death claim reimbursement involving an actual cash value policy or fair market value policy, normally the insurance company will pay for the appraisal. So, not always do you end up needing to do an appraisal before you insure a horse. So, again, it's always really important to reach out to your insurance broker, have a conversation, and find out what information they're going to need in order for you to be able to get your horse insured. So, some things that you need to do to help your appraiser. So, along with understanding your insurance policy inside and out, you want to make sure you keep good records of your insured horses, including pictures, videos, and show records, and you need to make sure you remember to keep them up to date. So, keeping track of the training put on your horse or the awards won at horse shows can help prove the value of your horse. If something, happens in the future, like a colic, let's say you end up in a trailer accident, God forbid, any of, those kinds of situations. So this is important, whether your horse is insured for agreed value or that actual cash value or fair market value. So I can't tell you the number of times I've been approached by insurance companies and asked to appraise a recently deceased horse, but the owner has no photos or videos of the horse and hasn't kept track of the horse's show records or training. And this can make it really difficult sometimes to prove the true value of the horse. So if you just make an effort, say every couple of months, especially if you're showing a lot, what twice a year, once a year, especially like if you have a barrel racing horse where you're showing on a lower circuit, keep track of that money that you're winning. Keep track of just everything that you're doing with that horse because it really helps prove the horse's value later on. This is another thing I get quite frequently is, will an appraisal help me sell my horse? So the short answer is I'm going to say no. And in my opinion, you want to save your money and do your own research for free. So I frequently see equine appraiser advertisements that say something like, want to market your sales horse, but not sure what to price it at, or, we can help you price your horse and, give you a professional opinion. So for me personally, I don't complete appraisals for sales price purposes. I consider it to be a little bit unethical. So now it would be a different story, if it was a litigation case, for example, and let's say you've got two co-owners who need to sell the horse and are litigating over what the sales price should be. So that's a different type of situation. But let's say you have a 7-year-old barrel racing horse and you need to sell that horse due to financial reasons. So should you hire an equine appraiser to tell you how much you should list the horse for? So I'm going to tell you not to do it. And so there's a few reasons why. So appraisal valuations are only good on the day that they were completed. So let's say your horse is still for sale a year later, that appraisal report may be likely obsolete by that time. Another issue is that appraisals can be expensive. I've seen prices range anywhere from $500 to $2,000 just to appraise one horse. It's much cheaper for a horse owner to research, online classified ad websites. There are so many Facebook sales groups out there, and they're at your disposal for free. So that can give you some idea of what similar types of horses are selling for in the current market. And the third thing is that you could also consider doing is reaching out to a local trainer or a sales barn that is experienced with that type of horse that you're selling. And, even if you have to pay a nominal fee to have them, sort of assess your horse, it's likely going to be a lot cheaper than getting an appraiser report done to find out how much you should put that horse up for sale for. But oftentimes, once I have conversations with potential clients and say, "Hey, if you've got a barrel racer, check out Barrel Racing World. If you've got a warm blood, check out Warm Bloods for sale. If you've got a hunter jumper, check out BigEck.com." And often, sort of leading them down that path, they're able to go through the search engines on those online classified sites, find horses that are similar, and say, "Oh, okay, this horse is selling for 50,000. This one's 45. This one's 48." So it sort of gives you an idea of what you should be selling your horse for. So I'm hoping that helps quite a few people out there. And that's the end of the presentation.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, again, as I said before, we get lots of phone calls at our office for people who think they've heard something about they need an appraisal. They don't know where to find an appraisal. What are suggestions you have for, do you need to get someone who's an appraiser who's very familiar with your particular breed or discipline, or someone from your state? Or what are the sort of suggestions you have for somebody who thinks maybe I do need an appraisal?
Absolutely. So if you do need an appraisal done, often there tends to be a reason. So it'd be a state settlement, divorce, some type of litigation, a donation. The first thing you want to do is look for an appraiser that's going to be familiar with the breed of horse that you need appraised or the discipline. So, for example, if you need Western Pleasure quarter horse appraised, who's done really well at Congress, the last thing you want to do is hire an appraiser who largely does show jumping horses. So that's probably not going to be the best appraiser for you to choose. The other thing that you need to do is really research that appraiser. Find out what their qualifications are. How many appraisals do they do every year? What kind of appraisal designations do they have? What kind of coursework have they done? Do they have an updated use pack course? So all of those things are going to help you. And the reason why, again, we go back to this is an unregulated profession, and so within the personal property appraisal industry. So, for example, let's say you know nothing about coins, but you decide tomorrow to put up a shingle and become a coin appraiser. You are allowed to do that. There are no regulations for personal property appraisers. So, as a result, anybody can put up a sign saying that they're going to appraise this type of property. And unfortunately, the burden is left on the consumer to do their homework and make sure they're hiring the right person for the job.
Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of positions in jobs in our industry that do not require any kind of credentials. And I think often of people who say, oh, they hung out the sign that said, oh, I'm a farrier, or some other profession. And people, I always try to say, buyer beware, just what you've described, Tracy, is be sure you check some references, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into with this thing. I can certainly see that there might be people who have been horse trainers or in a particular breed or discipline who decide they'll hang out a shingle and be an appraiser too because they think they have some background and some knowledge about that. But that could also lead to some conflicts of interest too. So there's lots of things to bear in mind when you're trying to hire somebody.
Absolutely. Yes. And where I see it come up most often again is in those IRS charitable donations. So I get hired a lot by people who are in the middle of an audit with the IRS. Their appraiser, obviously didn't do a good enough job with the appraisal, and they often bail and sort of leave the consumer. And so I often have someone reach out to me saying, hey, we do feel the horse is worth this amount. The IRS has deemed the appraiser's appraisal to be unqualified, and we need help. Like, what can you help us with? And so this does come up a lot. So it's really important that you vet who you're hiring. Again, like you said, in any aspect of the industry, whether it's a veterinarian, a farrier, a trainer, you name it.
Yeah, definitely the case. Does anybody in our audience have a question for Tracy? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. We have a small enough group today that we could do that. It's not going to be complicated to do. So does anybody want to pose a question to Tracy at this point?
Hi, Tracy. Emily Stearns. I think my question is, how do I know, what's the threshold maybe for needing an appraiser? Is it above or below a certain amount, or is it just kind of situation dependent?
That's actually a really great question. And it really varies. It's sort of like asking how long is a piece of string. So obviously, if you've got a really high valued horse who is, in the middle of litigation, it's often in your best interest to, pursue that through the courts. And if you're in need of an appraisal, to get that done. In a lot of cases, when the horse is of minimal value, sometimes paying for an appraisal can end up, costing more than the value of the horse. But what I'm finding more and more is because litigation can be so expensive, and it's often stated that just to get your foot in the courtroom is about $25,000 by the time you pay for the back and forth conversations between attorneys and court filings and those kinds of things. But depending on your state, or in Canada, your province, a lot of people are starting to actually see the benefit of going through small claims court. I know within Canada, we often have, say, a $25,000, $30,000 limit. And depending on the state, it can be a different limit. And so, even for a horse that's, say, worth 40,000, and let's say your state small claims court limit is 15,000, it still may be in your best interest to file that $150 processing fee and go through small claims court to try and recoup some of your costs. And so there's just such a wide variety of reasons why people contact appraisers. And you know, it can be anything from just needing to get some financial, you know, monies back out of a poor transaction. In some cases, it may be, you know, um, I guess a client of a trainer who scorned them, that they don't care how much it's going to cost. They want to pursue litigation, even though they may be awarded minimally or not at all, simply to have that verdict on the books, so that unscrupulous trainer is sort of in the court books going forward. So there's a lot of different reasons. But I do tend to find that horses that tend to be under the 15,000 range tend to be that threshold. Sometimes even in the $10,000 range tends to be a threshold for most cases.
Mm. It makes me curious, Tracy. Is there reasons that someone who wants to lease a horse might want to do an appraisal before they go into a lease arrangement, so they have proof of what the horse's value was before it was leased, and then when it gets returned to them, you know, sort of, so they sort of have the bookends, if you will, of what the value of the horse is?
Yeah, sometimes that can be a good strategy. And not so much, I think, for sort of having the value of the horse on the books, but having someone that's seen the horse, you know, seen the horse going, you know, understanding that where the horse is at their current training level. And then if, God forbid, anything goes wrong during the lease, you sort of have that documentation that, hey, this is where the horse was here or there. You know, if you end up having to litigate anything in the future. I think the only other time I see that for leases is a lease to buy. You know, sometimes it's a similar situation to what I talked about earlier, where you've got two parties. One wants to lease the horse and do a lease to buy. The other person wants to sell the horse, and they really are not sure what they should be pricing the horse at, or the leaser may have a different value than the leasee. And so sometimes I will get approached to sort of be the middleman, and sort of help guide them on what a proper valuation would be for the horse, so that leasee can lease the horse and then do a purchase along the way.
Before I forget, I had asked you earlier, is there a search engine, a website location where people can go and find a list of recognized equine appraisers?
Yeah, so if you go to the American Society of Equine Appraisers, I think you have to contact them directly and just explain what type of horse or discipline that you need appraised. And they can usually give you a list of appraisers, you know, within that discipline, breed, or within your state or your province. You know, organizations like the International Society of Appraisers, the American Society of Appraisers, they both have search engines that you can put in your information, and find, you know, suitable personal property appraisers for whatever it is that you need appraised. So yeah, those are three organizations. The other thing is, you know, Google can be your friend. You know, if you've got a barrel racer for sale and say look up you know, equine appraiser barrel racers, equine appraisers dressage, sometimes that will bring up quite a few different searches. And usually search engines such as Google will tend to sort of pull up people in your area first at the top. And so those can be helpful.
Excellent. That will come in really handy. I've got somebody who already contacted me via email saying, hey, where do I find someone near me? So now I've got an answer for them.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that there is no requirement to hire someone. So let's say you're in California, and you have a Western pleasure horse that needs to be appraised. So you don't have to hire someone from California. You can hire someone from Florida. You can hire someone from Canada. So I would dare say about 80% of my clients, I'm in Canada, but about 80% of my clients are in the United States and Europe. So obviously you don't need to just hire someone within your own state. I think what's more important is hiring someone who's going to be the most knowledgeable about
Mhm.
your horse or the discipline, breed, and someone that's properly trained.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody else have a question for Tracy today before we start to wrap up here? Okay, well, Tracy, thank you so very much. This has been very helpful. We will post this recording out on our website. Probably in the next day or two. We'll just do a little post-production on it and get it out there. So feel free to take advantage of that, folks. If you didn't get to listen to everything and you want to hear the replay, or you weren't able to join us at all and you want to take it from the top, please know that the American Horse Council is here for you. If you have questions about any of this process, feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to try to direct you to someone who can assist you. You know, we're not attorneys and we're not CPAs and we're not appraisers ourselves as staff, but we've got those great resources and contacts that we can pass on to you so that you can get to know just the right expert that you need for whatever your circumstances might be. We do a monthly podcast, and we'd encourage you to join us on Horses in the Morning Radio Network to hear our podcast every month. We have a lot of great, interesting speakers. We just did one on careers in the equine industry, which was a lot of fun to talk to a number of people who work in the universities, and they're always advising students on how to find just the right career. I don't think any of them thought of being an appraiser. Tracy, maybe that's a new profession I need to add to my laundry list there. But take advantage of the podcast, and then we typically do these webinars about once a quarter or once every couple of months. We have a wide range of guests and topics. So if there's something that you have an interest in and you haven't heard us do something, drop me a note, info@horsecouncil.org, and we'll look around and try to find someone to speak on that subject. So with that, I thank you so much. Happy Veterans Day. Happy Remembrance Day. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.